Hello. So this is sort of the first official video for my YouTube channel, and I'm gonna tell y'all a crazy story. So in Bible times, there's this man named David, and David is important because he's the king. He's the king a long time before Jesus was born. And as the king, David had a lot of responsibilities. David is looking out for the entire land where he lives and is defending that land against enemies, and is also in charge of leading the army and should usually always be with the army. And David was a good king. David was chosen. He was brave. He was a man after God's own heart. He was just on it, you know? So anyway, one day, after a while of David being a king, he made a decision. His decision was, well, I'm just gonna let my generals go to war. They're gonna go fight. I'm just gonna kick it. I'm not really feeling up to it. I'm just gonna stay home. So he's kind of lazing around, just chilling, walking around his palace or whatnot, and he's up there one night, like on the roof. He comes out, maybe can't sleep or whatever, looks over, somehow or another, he's kind of like looking around and sees a naked woman bathing. Now, he chose to look a little longer than he should have, caught some desire, and made a decision that would affect the lives of many, many, many people. And that's the story we're going to talk about. So this is the story of David and Bathsheba. Now, just so happens that woman was Bathsheba, and she was actually on the roof that night bathing to wash from her uncleanness, which is kind of a biblical way of saying she was washing from basically her period. So she's getting cleaned up. David sees her, says, I want that one. Now, David's already got wives. David's actually got more wives than he's technically even supposed to have. He's got wives and he's got concubines. But he sees her and says, I want her. And he tells the people in his, under his control, his guard or whatever, he said, go get her. Bring her here. So David does that. He goes, he has people that go. They're sent, they go get her, they bring her back to him, he lies with her, and that's a biblical way of saying he slept with her. And it turns out Bathsheba is married. She's married to Uriah, which is one of his soldiers, somebody he knows of. And he was just dead wrong for that. That was not a good thing that he did. He chose to take somebody else's wife and to know her in a way that he should not. And it's at this point where I think David made a decision that would forever alter what we know and read in history concerning him and what he did throughout his reign as a king. Because had he had the level of humility required to make an admission of being wrong in that moment, he could have spared so many lives and so much pain to so many different people. But of course, David being a king and being a bit of a stubborn, proud, arrogant, fallen individual, he decided he wasn't going to do that. It's not even mentioned that he thought he had the option. What it says is, after he lied with Bathsheba, he decided to try to trick her husband to sleep with her. So it doesn't give an exact amount of time, but however long passed, and Uriah, along with the rest of some of the soldiers, came back close to the palace, and David kind of sidles up to Uriah and says, Uriah, man, you ought to go home. You ought to spend the night with your wife. You ought to spend the night in your own bed. You ought to be there. Go get comfortable. Take the night off. Enjoy your matrimony to Bathsheba. And Uriah refuses. He says, no, far be it from me to do something like that. My brothers, they're out here sleeping basically on straw mats and whatnot, out just uncomfortable. And I'm not the type of man, I'm not going to go home and be in the bed with my own wife. That's not right. And to me, this is just kind of like, it's like in this, knowing what happens further into the story, it's like heartbreaking to see that level of honor and integrity at work in Uriah, that Uriah totally passed on this opportunity to go home, to be comfortable, to just chill in the bed with his wife and enjoy the fruits of marriage with her. But he decides he's going to be a man of integrity, a man of honor. He's not going to do that. So the next night comes. David still does not even appear to understand that he could in humility admit his mistake, accept the consequences of it, and make it right now. But what he does is he sidles up to Uriah again. Hey, come on, check this out. So they start drinking. He gets Uriah drunk. And so he's like, Uriah, go home, man. Go home, be with your wife, spend the night with her, Uriah wouldn't do it. Passed out, like basically in the waiting area of the palace. Woke up the next morning, and David had made a decision. He couldn't trick Uriah into going home to be with Bathsheba. Therefore, he could not plausibly or conceivably make Uriah believe that he fathered David's baby because Bathsheba got pregnant. So he tells a couple of his generals, a couple of the leaders of his army, he says, you know what you got to do? You got to get that fool Uriah at the front of the lines and position him in such a way that there's no way that he won't die when you guys approach the enemy fortifications. So he basically puts Uriah in such a position that Uriah has to die. There's just no other way. He's gone, and he doesn't even know it. And so it's even deeper, it's even more messed up, but essentially that's what happens. They send him off, he dies, and then David takes Bathsheba to be his wife. Now, David takes Bathsheba to be his wife, but God is not blind, and God sees what David has done. And David's supposed to be the king of God's people. That's not going to go over well. And it doesn't, because sure enough, Uriah, having died out there and left Bathsheba alone, it's like, that's just, yeah. So anyway, what happens is Bathsheba gives birth to the baby's dead. And David collapses on the floor, he's fasting, he's wailing, or no, the baby's sick. But the baby appears to that it might die. And so David collapses on the floor. He's fasting and he's waiting and he's praying and he's hoping maybe God will spare the baby. And God does not spare the baby. The baby dies. So finally David gets up from his time of mourning when the baby dies, and he's repented. And he understands, well, no, he was hopeful that God might spare the baby and let David have him as a son or a daughter. And anyway, David's going on about his life, and in some sense it's almost like this didn't happen, though it did, and it is still even affecting a lot of people at this time. But what happens next is that David runs into a prophet, and it's the prophet Nathaniel. This prophet Nathaniel, he comes up to David, and he's like, David, I want to tell you a story. He says, and this is a paraphrase, I haven't read this actually in quite some time, which is why I'm a little foggy on the details, but basically he says to David, so there's a really rich merchant somewhere in a town, and this fella, he's got all the sheep you could ever imagine. He's got countless. He could have sheep for days. And then there's this, basically this poor person that's under his watch, who has one sheep, and he's raised the sheep as his it's his favorite sheep. He's tended to it, he's raised it, he's given it a name, presumably. He's walking it around, petting it. He loves this little thing. And one day somebody comes along and says, oh, that sheep there, that one, I want that one. Well, I want one of these sheep. And the merchant, rich as he is with all the sheep that he has, he sees the one that belongs to the young man, and he says, that one, go get that one, knowing he's got all of these under his control at his disposal. Anytime that he wants, he can have any of those, but he chooses this favorite sheep that belongs to this particular individual. He says, go ahead, kill that one, cut it up, let's have that one. Breaks the heart of this individual to lose his only sheep. And David is appalled, he's outraged. And he says, who is it that would do something terrible like that? Who is it that I might proclaim justice against them? And Nathaniel looks at him cold, says, that's you, David. And David was struck then in that moment with the realization of what he had done. Him being the king, with access to every wife and concubine that he has, chose to take another man's wife and deprive that man of his wife, and then furthermore deprive that man of his own life. And that's when it hit him, and he realized, and he was able to repent for the horror, for the atrocity that he had committed. And that's just a crazy story. And it's how so often sin does not settle for the initial act, which in David's case, it may be more deep than this even, but from what I can see, just laying out the story I laid out for you, the first thing that I can say is David decided that he wasn't going to go with his army. He was where he shouldn't have been. And from being where he shouldn't have been, he was looking out over his kingdom and saw something he shouldn't have seen, and then decided that he wanted what he saw that he shouldn't have seen, And what he shouldn't have seen shouldn't have been his, because it already belonged to another man in the form of Bathsheba being married to Uriah. That's his wife. Nobody should look upon her but him. And in taking that woman to be his, the list goes on and on and on, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And the worst things that happen along this chain of events ends with the death of the baby, the wife being deprived of her husband, the wife being stolen and married to someone who already has several wives and concubines, the husband being murdered, being betrayed essentially by his own brothers, and being a man of honor and integrity who had done nothing wrong, literally nothing wrong. He had married Bathsheba and then even refused to go and spend the night with her. He was blameless in this matter, and his life was forfeited him by David. And for David to be a man after God's own heart, you can really look into this and go some different places in understanding just the history and the miraculous decisions that God has made to allow Jesus to be a descendant of David, the very man who did these awful things. But also the repentance that David was undergoing in his life as he realized the things he had done, to become a man that would never do anything like that again. It's really a beautiful thing. And that's the work of God. And there's probably so much more to say, but I have got to go. So, peace.